As Denver Broncos interim head coach Jerry Rosburg made a strong enough case to get an interview for their vacant head coaching job going into 2023. Plus, it is Fan Friday all across Broncos Country, so you know what that means. You sent in your questions using hashtag AskLOB. We answer them here on today's brand new episode, Locked on Broncos.
You are Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, Broncos Country? Welcome into a brand new episode, Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We just want to say thank you so much to everybody in Broncos Country for tuning in and making Locked On Broncos your first listen of the day every single day. You can get this podcast available free and wherever you get your podcast. You can also get this on YouTube, where you can watch us in 4K high definition on your smartphone, your TV, or even your computer. From the South Stands to the End Zone, I'm your host, as always, Cody Roark, Broncos reporter for Mile High Sports, joined alongside, as always, by my co-host and good friend, Sayre Bedinger, site expert, predominantly orange.com. Sayre, my friend, I always love Fan Friday. We get Broncos Country involved in the conversation a little bit more. We have a really cool feature. If those are watching on YouTube, they're going to see a really cool video feature that brings their tweets up onto our screen. We feel like a television show here, my friend. Outside of that, let's talk about and open up today's episode of the show. Obviously, a couple days away, the Broncos will close out their 2022 NFL season against Justin Herbert, the Los Angeles Chargers. Thought you did a very good job on the crossover previewing the matchup with David Drogemeyer of the Locked On Chargers podcast. If you missed that, Broncos Country, it is available on your favorite podcasting provider or on YouTube if you want to go back and watch that if you did not catch the action. With that said, Sayre, Jerry Rosburg, in my opinion, right, is he making a case to be interviewed for the head coaching job going into 2023? I think if anything's on the table, I think it's certainly a possibility, and I'll add a little bit more context to it as well. But I wanted to get your thoughts on the subject.
Yeah, regardless of who the team hires as head coach, could they hire Jerry Rosburg as the guy who does the weekly head coach media availability, right, to speak for the team? He's like the team spokesperson or the coach's spokesperson. I love listening to Jerry Rosburg talk. I love his insights, and I just think the way that he articulates things, Cody, really indicates to me that he's giving these really well thought out responses to every question. It just indicates to me that there is one quality, one particular factor. If we have to point to anything, I think that if you want to make a case, his perceptiveness in every area of the team, I think, makes him much better at managing the overall team. You know, you look at a number of different areas of the squad that he has completely reshaped in a short amount of time, like making a change on the offensive line, firing Butch Berry and replacing him with Ben Steele, or making a change at special teams coordinator with Dwayne Stukes getting fired, and then Mike Mallory, as well as obviously Jerry Rosburg getting their hands dirty in that area a little bit more. And you look at just so many other things, you know, the Alberto Cuebanam situation where he talked about, I've seen this guy run around in practice and I couldn't understand why, you know, he wasn't playing. I'm paraphrasing there, of course, but every area of the team, it seems like he has a different perspective on. It seems like his perception is more in alignment with kind of, I don't want to say it's groupthink, but it's more along the masses, right? So you can kind of tell that his perception is kind of what our perception has been. Like certain areas of the team just aren't good enough. And he's gone in and immediately shifted some of those areas, right? So I think just the fact that he's so perceptive and able to manage the team from that vantage point, and also that he seems very player friendly. I don't know, Cody. There's a lot going in Jerry Rosburg's favor. I don't necessarily know that, you know, he'd be at the top of everyone's list, but I think you see more and more. I don't know about your mentions these days, Cody, but I know a lot of people are jumping in my mentions saying that they're all about Jerry Rosburg for 2023.
Yeah, I'm a big Jerry Rosburg fan, and, you know, as much as I hate to say, as much as I love Nathaniel Hackett, we've gotten more from Jerry Rosburg in the media in just about a week and a half than we got, I think, all season long. Like, we don't get robotic answers from Rosburg. But I will say this. I did talk with a prominent Broncos player in the locker room, and I asked him about how things have been since Jerry's kind of taken over. And, the response I got was he knows how to command a football team. And it's not about just X's and O's. Like, it's not always about that. It's about being able to lead a football team in the right way and to be able to, I'd say, like, the word that he mentioned to me was kind of hold everybody accountable, right? Everything is front and center, but it's not like in a derogatory way. It's like, hey, we have to be better in this aspect. We have to be better in this aspect. So far, the response from players that I have spoken to is they like Jerry Rosburg and the command that he's taken with this team, and maybe that's what they've needed, right? The balance, because for Rosburg, he cares about these players, but he also is, when it's football, it's business. It's the switch is flipped. So, why not? Like, I think that, it's been a shot in the arm, right? And granted, we only have one game. I wish we could get more of a sample size with Rosburg. So much will be also contingent upon how the Broncos come out, I think, this week against the Chargers and play. If they, play really well and fight hard once again and even win, absolutely. I think you have to interview them. But if they, revert back into the old Broncos team, right, then I think that, I think you can interview him. But I think that you want to see a little bit more of a sample size, because it's unfortunate when you get 2 games to see some of the changes that he has implemented with this team. But so far, players like him, players that I've spoken to, he's got the fine balance of leading and also, caring about guys and having real serious conversations. I don't know if anyone had a chance to catch his press conference from Wednesday, but he talked about the message and kind of how it was when they talked about Damar Hamlin as a team, when they addressed it as a team and that, it's bigger than football. Stuff like that I think is super important in my eyes. And I'll say this as well. I also had a chance to talk with Albert O on Wednesday, and I just asked him, hey, how did it feel to kind of get back out there and play? And he's like, it felt good. He said, for me, the first half or something, he said, he was really amped up a little bit, had the nerves going because it's been a while. Like, he hasn't played in a while. And he said, after I caught that touchdown, I was just, I felt back to my old self. And so, hey, let's see some more Albert O this week here, Sayre, my friend. That's one thing I know I'm looking forward to seeing. You're looking forward to seeing. Maybe Broncos Country is looking forward to seeing as well. And we asked the question here to everybody listening or watching the Lockdown Broncos podcast. When it comes to Jerry Rosburg, would you like to see him interviewed for the head coaching job here in 2023? Drop your comments down below on YouTube if you're watching on YouTube, or you can tweet us on Twitter at Cody Roark NFL, at Sayre Bedinger, at Locked On Broncos. But on today's episode of the show, folks, it is Fan Friday, and Broncos Country, as always, sends in some great questions that we'll break down here on the show. And now you can get involved in a more interactive feature where you can actually have your tweets physically pulled up onto our show in video format just by using hashtag AskLOB. Something going forward for everybody in Broncos Country. We'll dive into that on today's episode of the show. This episode of the show is brought to you by our friends at Prize Picks. Prize Picks is daily fantasy sports done right, and with the Prize Picks app, you choose 2 to 5 players that you're focused on heading into the week. And these players, they'll have a projection that's set by Prize Picks, so you simply choose whether or not they will have more or less than their Prize Picks projection, which could allow you to win 10 times your money on any entry. There's no competing against other people. It's just you versus the projections that are available. Download the Prize Picks app or go to prizepicks.com to sign up and play daily fantasy sports. First time users can receive a 100% deposit match bonus up to $100 with promo code LOCKEDON. That's one word, Locked On. If you deposit $100, Prize Picks is going to give you $100. If you deposit $50, Prize Picks is going to give you $50. Don't forget to enter promo code Locked On at sign up for an instant deposit match up to $100. One of the things we love about Broncos Country is how involved they want to be with the show and how involved they are in the show. Fan Friday allows us to include you and your tweets that you sent in to us using hashtag AskLOB. So let's get into that. Let's dive into some of the questions we received for Fan Friday here on today's episode of the show. Just want to say thank you so much to everybody in Broncos Country for making Lockdown Broncos your first listen of the day every single day. Starting things off here, let's pull up the tweets. We get some in from our man Kinley G on Twitter. First question he asks, what are you hoping our Broncos do in free agency? Now, Sayre, I think you and I, we've kind of talked about this. We've foreshadowed a little bit because it is coming up. I think so much for us is contingent upon who is the next head coach for Denver, right? But from a personnel standpoint and from players that are already on the roster, we can maybe take a little bit more of a realistic look at, okay, what might they do here? So with that said, I'll let you answer this one. What are you hoping the Broncos do in free agency?
Well, it is a great question. I think you start first and foremost by hopefully re-signing your best free agent, which is Draymond Jones, right? You hope that Draymond is able and willing to buy into the new culture, whatever the next head coach brings in, whether they keep Ejiro Evero or whether they bring in a new defensive coordinator, or if the coach is defensive oriented. We don't know exactly what's going to transpire, but hopefully Draymond Jones will be a focal point there. So I think that's one of the first and foremost. But you start looking outside of the Denver Broncos, right? What are we going to do to upgrade from players who don't play for the Broncos right now or who aren't on the roster right now? I think you look at free agency on the offensive line, the defensive line, including the edge position, maybe some bargain type players off the edge, and then wide receiver as well, Cody. And I don't know that that's necessarily going to be like 1, 2, 3 on the priority order in free agency for the Broncos. We don't necessarily know what cap casualties could be out there that end up being atop your free agent wish list. Remember, 2014, the Broncos went in hard after Everson Griffin in free agency, and then all of a sudden DeMarcus Ware gets cut. Your priorities change. So things just, happen like that in free agency all the time. And certainly you can pivot. So right now, the free agent class looks fairly strong at positions. Maybe the Broncos won't be overly active in free agency, namely like quarterback is a very oddly strong position in free agency this year. Running back, which we know how much everybody loves to spend big on the running back position, a very strong running back crop in the free agency group. So maybe the Broncos will look there if there's so many names that really it drives the price of certain guys down. But I guess in terms of who you sign right away, you got to sign Draymond Jones. I think you got to find a way to re-sign Alex Singleton as well. And from there, you can kind of approach free agency like the draft, right? A best player available type of approach.
Yeah, I think you have to prioritize who your best in-house guys are, right? And the Broncos, they'll have some options. They have some restricted free agents, some ERFA, exclusive rights free agents. Singleton and Draymond, in my opinion, are the top two guys that absolutely need to be taken care of by the Broncos. When you look at just Alex Singleton's impact on defense, and also you look at him on special teams, it's a shoo-in. It would be crazy to not bring him back. So I know we'll focus a little bit more on that. We have some games, that we're going to do some interactive stuff here with fans as we get closer to free agency in terms of in-house guys. Who do you bring back? Who do you not bring back? So on and so forth. Well, let's continue on here with another question from Kinley, our friend here. He says, also, what are you guys hoping to see in the season finale? Sayre, for me, I just want to see this Broncos team. I want to see them play just as hard as they did against Kansas City Chiefs, right? Which sounds cliche, but what we've seen so far from this team, this story for them all year has been inconsistency, right? They've been up, they've been down, they've kind of been in between of going up and down. And the reality is, I just want to see them put together a consistent performance. And I felt like, for the most part against the Chiefs, in all three phases, we did see some consistency. Now, the question is going to be, and you talked about this on the crossover, so much is contingent upon whether or not the Chargers will play their starters based on how the Baltimore Ravens game goes early on in the day on Sunday. So, it can completely change everything for Denver and how they do. You want to see them go up against Justin Herbert, Mike Williams, Keenan Allen, Austin Eckler, and you want to see them beat a playoff team, but they may not get the chance to, depending upon how that game goes with the Ravens.
And I think there's still going to be some value. Let's say the Bengals beat the Ravens and the Chargers are in the driver's seat for that 5th seed in the AFC, right? If that does end up happening, man, I think the Broncos have an opportunity, even if the Chargers trot out Chase Daniel and whoever else they've still got on the roster behind their starters, right? And you go up and whoop up on some of these backups, because that there is value in that to me, because you look at the way the Broncos have played all throughout the season. We haven't seen enough positive from the offense specifically to be able to be picky about who it comes against, right? We can't be picky if it was against the Chargers backup. I don't really care. I want to see them executing at a high level, right? If they're doing it against Joey Bosa and Khalil Mack, or if they're doing it against whoever do the Chargers have Jeremiah Tauchu again? I don't even know who they have behind those guys. But, man, you want to see the offense go out there and play well, right? You want to see Russell Wilson throw touchdowns to Jerry Jeudy and Courtland Sutton. You want to see Chase Edmonds or Latavius Murray or both go for 100 yards on the ground. I don't care who it comes against. And people will try to, if that does end up happening, they'll try to invalidate it all offseason. Whereas I think we haven't seen enough positive from the offense to be able to be picky about that. And I do want to see that regardless of who they're playing against personnel-wise for the Chargers. I want to see the Broncos go whoop up on somebody. I want to see them put up 30-plus points. I want to see them put up 400 to 500 yards of offense. I want to see them do all these things. Even if it's the last game of the season, even if it's too little too late, it doesn't matter at this point. You need to go into the offseason on as high a note as possible. You haven't won a division game since, remember, Pat Surtain, the pick-6 game against the Los Angeles Chargers in Denver last season. That was your last divisional win. You need a divisional win. You need positivity on the offense. You need good game tape out there for the next head coach candidate. You need all these things. So there's so much going for the Broncos, regardless of who the Chargers put out there. But I'm glad you brought that up, because I think a lot of people will try to invalidate a good performance, and we need it to be said. We need it to be on the record that it doesn't matter who it's going up against, right? Who the Broncos are going up against. If they perform well, that's what matters.
Yeah, no, I'm with you there, and I think that's a great point. It doesn't matter if it's, the Little Giants or if it's Justin Herbert. You have to find a way to bring the heat on Sunday here. Final one we're going to get to on this segment of Locked On Broncos here is from @me250-25622. That's a mouthful right there, but obviously love me. Always send some great stuff in here. Ask the question, when we have the worst O-line in the NFL, why are there people that expect the best quarterback? 53 sacks is the most in his career, after saying Seattle had a worse line, which is a joke. Playing 2 fewer games with still one left. The reality of the situation is, it's not just on the offensive line. It's not just on Russell Wilson, right? I think there's mutual blame between the two of them. On some of these sacks that Russ has taken out of the 53, some have been on him holding the ball way too long. On, the other ones, it's been the offensive line getting beat or giving up, interior pressure that's allowed to a sack, right? So it's not just exclusive to one or the other, but I think a lot of that has also been predicated off of scheme. And I think for the most part, we saw an adjustment last week against the Chiefs. What if, though? What if they were playing better? What if they had Rosburg's direction early on in the season? Who knows? That's just speculation at this point, but that is a great question. Thank you for sending it in. We'll get to more Broncos Country Fan Friday questions, including, other than Jim Harbaugh, Sean Payton, Dan Quinn, and Ejiro Evero, who do we think that the Broncos should take a look at? Some wild card names as well, including a couple of coaches that have been around for quite some time that haven't coached in quite some time. You'll get that on today's episode, Lockdown Broncos. This episode of the show is brought to you by our friends at BetOnline.net, and BetOnline.net is your number one source for sports betting info, stats, news, and analysis. You get the latest odds and trends for every professional and amateur league out there, from football to college bowl season to basketball and the World Cup. We've got it all at BetOnline.net, and if you love sports podcasts, you can even find those as well at BetOnline. We're always the fastest and the easiest way to get your betting info, so head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more. BetOnline, where the game starts. Continuing on today's episode, Lockdown Broncos Fan Friday edition, we got 3 more questions that we're going to answer for everybody in Broncos country. So let's pull up the first one here from our good friend Daniel Lutz. He asked the question, other than Harbaugh, Payton, Quinn, and Evero, who do you see getting interviews for this wide net that ownership is supposed to be casting for a coaching candidate? Now, this is a very interesting question as well, right? We talk about Ben Johnson. We talk about Shane Steichen. I mean, there's other guys. D'Amico Ryans could be a possibility as well. I don't think it's just going to be those top guys, right? I think that on paper, everyone's talking about, okay, Harbaugh, Payton, Quinn, these are the top candidates. I don't necessarily believe those are the Broncos' top candidates. I don't even believe they have a number 1, 2, 3. I think they're going to interview a wide variety of people and see who is the best fit, because as we've seen before, you can have the best fit on paper, but it may not translate. Denver has to do their due diligence in this situation. Your quick thoughts on that?
Yeah, Cody, I think last year is exhibit A of why you have to cast a wider net, right? You missed out on Brian Daboll. You missed out on Doug Peterson. You missed out on Mike McDaniel. All 3 of those coaches might be in the playoffs this year. And so I think the fact that you didn't even interview those guys is a huge, huge asterisk on the coaching search last year. And just the fact of it plays into those rumors about what everyone thought that, well, Nathaniel Hackett was a means to the Aaron Rodgers end. So I think you do have to cast a wide net. There's a lot of names out there, like you mentioned, Leslie Frazier, Jonathan Gannon, Shane Bowen, the defensive coordinator at Tennessee, Brian Callahan, who interviewed last year, the OC for the Cincinnati Bengals, maybe David Shaw, who left his post at Stanford. Maybe that's the Stanford connection we're supposed to look at. Lou Anarumo, the DC for the Bengals. Plenty of names out there to consider.
Yeah, and I think that you want to have that, right? Diversity. It's also at the same point, too, right? If there's going to be an actual coaching search, there's going to be a panel, right? And Denver had a panel last year. I think it was like 5 or 6 people. But these are people that are now Broncos ownership, decision makers, and potentially Peyton Manning as a potential consultant. That's always something that could be an opportunity for the Broncos and the ownership group to reach out and ask him to be a part of in terms of doing the background on some of these coaches. Because here's the thing, when you interview, right, you always get the best representation of whoever is interviewing. You always get that. Nathaniel Hackett is a fantastic interviewer. Don't get me wrong. And a lot of things that he said that he was going to do, and we saw some clips. The Broncos even released some of the clips about it. We never got to see that stuff, right? So it was all really just kind of talk and hyperbole at that point. So I do think they need to cast a little bit of a wider net. Let's get on to our next question here. It comes in from Big Mike. He says, the ownership wants to swing hard at some great head coaches like Harbaugh. Is there any other names like Harbaugh we should maybe pay attention to that would be out of the normal cycle? For example, someone like Bill O'Brien. I'm personally on the board of saying, hell no to Bill O'Brien. I don't want Bill O'Brien anywhere near the Denver Broncos. That would be disaster 2.0 waiting to happen. He could stay at Alabama in the college game. There's we all know the horror stories about B.O.B. and obviously the Bill Belichick tree at that point. But Sayre, there are some names that, haven't been coaching for a while that would still like to coach or should be considered to be a coach. Who are they?
Yeah, you look at names like, remember the old Bengals head coach Marvin Lewis. He's interviewed for some jobs over the last couple years, as well as Jim Caldwell. Those are two veteran coaches who have had, plenty of measure of success in the NFL at various stages. And the NFL has obviously evolved and changed and adapted, even since, remember when Marvin Lewis had the Bengals in the playoffs almost every year, but that was about it. Right. And Jim Caldwell did a great job with the Colts and the Lions as well. But things are different now. You kind of wonder, why are those guys not getting head coach looks, or why are they not being, finalists for jobs or things like that? So it's kind of an interesting situation, but I think those are names that are potentially out there. I don't know if you look at the college ranks. I guess I don't know, Cody, really which coaches at this point would be looking to bounce up to the NFL. Lincoln Riley's name always pops up, or Campbell from Iowa State. Those would be off the wall. And if you're talking about off the wall, like, they would have to be names that make our eyebrows raise and kind of, make our jaws drop, right? Because those are the guys that you don't expect. So I don't know. If you expect the unexpected, you can't necessarily put names to it. It would have to be out of left field, off the wall, ideas that nobody's really even thought of at this point as realistic options. But maybe that is a potential situation for the Denver Broncos, given the ownership group does, as we've heard, want to make a big swing at this. They want to make a big splash. And what does that mean? Like, what does that look like? There's the Jim Harbaughs and the Sean Paytons, of course, but like a big swing to me, Cody, Dan Quinn, I don't think that's a big swing. I feel like Dan Quinn is, trying to slap a single into, just trying to get a bloop over the first baseman's head. It's a safe option to get you on base. What is a big swing to everyone in Broncos country? Let us know down in the comments. If it's somebody besides, Jim Harbaugh or Sean Payton. Cody, maybe you have some thoughts on that as well. But I perceive from this coaching search, either the big swing is one of those two guys that's going to cost 20 plus million, or a first-time candidate again, which would be a big swing in terms of being a bigger risk.
Yeah, and look, to the point too, especially guys like Lincoln Riley, how often do we see guys jump from the college game to the NFL and succeed, right? It's hard, because when you can get away with treating people a certain way at the college level, right? But as a coach, you come in and you try to treat grown men a certain way. Like, I would say that's one of the reasons why Harbaugh fell out in San Francisco, is players grew tired of how he was treating them, and he lost the locker room because of how he was pushing guys, right? I think that's a fine line. You have to really figure that out. Like, what do the Broncos really need at that point? Do you need a guy that's going to be as callous and kind of cold-hearted, and as Jim Harbaugh has reported to be? Sean Payton kind of very similar in that regard as well. I think you have to understand all these things when you're interviewing these candidates who you really want to get, and I think it's something that we should all keep an eye on here. Our final one that we're going to get to on today's episode, Lockdown Broncos Fan Friday, just want to say thank you so much. You can always get involved in the conversation by using hashtag AskLOB, and then asking your Broncos question. We'll feature it here on the show every single week. Our good friend, newtype_JK47. Would Justin Outten be considered for retention if he calls another competent yet creative at times offense? It is a very small sample size, yet it seemed like he maximized Russell Wilson better than anyone else in one game. This is the dilemma, right? I think we really have to see how this weekend goes. I just think that because of the fact that he's never called plays for in his career except for last week, the sample size being so small, you're bringing in a new head coach. To me, it seems unlikely, regardless of whatever he does against the Chargers, that he is back, unfortunately, which is kind of, the unfortunate nature of the National Football League. Sayre, what are your thoughts on this, my friend?
I would say, how the turntables, with Justin Outten, right? I mean, it's absolutely interesting to me that now the discussion has shifted to could he stick around after a strong performance or a strong game called against the Chiefs? Whereas before it was like, what do you even do here, man? Like, what is your job? What is your role? Nathaniel Hackett was the initial play caller. Then it was turned over to Clint Kubiak. Now you're seeing that, again, Jerry Rosburg, he has given this role over to Justin Outten for the final two games. And it just makes you wonder, what has he seen in him? How has he seen him interact with the players? What has he heard from him in terms of just his ideas of getting players involved in the offense? And what did we say after the game, or what did we say in earlier this week? We talked about how we finally saw Courtland Sutton and Jerry Jeudy working together on the field and actually both getting involved in the same game. We saw Alberto getting involved in the passing game. We saw two running backs in the backfield, a successful and pretty balanced ground game. We saw better blocking in this game than we've seen in the running game most of the season. So it's kind of interesting, Cody. I agree with you, though. I think it's going to be tough to bring him back depending on who gets hired. But at the same time, I think it's substantial that the conversation has changed to what it is right now and the question that was asked.
I think it's an interesting case to be made, right? And, it's unfortunate for some of these coaches, right? And that's the thing, too. I've talked to a lot of players, and they said there's some really damn good coaches on the staff. And when you have a new head coach that's going to be coming in, like a lot of the staff is going to change. And so once again, a lot of these players who've got, grown accustomed to their position coach or coordinator or something like that, it may be entirely different next year, which, can have its own kind of consequences as well. But you know what? The 2022 season is nearly over. We're bummed out that Broncos football won't be on until next year after this Sunday. And we're going to savor in every moment that we can to talk about it with you and everybody in Broncos Country. We have you covered every single day, all year long. Even when the season ends, we still have Lockdown Broncos to get you through the Broncos blues. Appreciate you so much, Broncos Country. Thank you so much for tuning in, making us your first listen of the day on your favorite audio podcasting platform, or whether you watch on YouTube. We'll see you Sunday after the game against the Los Angeles Chargers.